So Todd and Martin, you can go ahead now.
All right. Let's make sure I. Was there an intro slide, Dinah, that you wanted to share?
No, that was it.
Oh, okay. All right, great. So let me just make sure I'm sharing correctly. Okay, is that coming through?
That's it.
All right, well, my name's Todd, and I work in the database developer tools team here at Oracle. I'm a PM director. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you today. We're looking forward to it. I am delighted to be joined today by Martin D'Souza, who is one of our notable Apex luminaries out there in the Oracle Apex community. And Martin's going to provide a customer perspective on using Oracle Apex and Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So today, there's a couple things we wanted to cover with you. We're going to talk a little bit about what's new for Oracle Apex in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure generally. And I'm going to focus on some fairly recent stuff, last 6 months or so. We'll start off with that. And then the really big news recently is we've just formally announced a new low-cost Oracle Apex service running in OCI. So it's really all about Apex. And we're going to dwell on that topic for a bit here in this presentation. I'm going to describe features. We'll do a little demo. I'll convey some information about the pricing and the packaging. We want to be just completely transparent and upfront about all that. Give you the information we know you want and need. We'll talk a little bit about roadmap. But I'm going to really dwell on this new Apex service that we have just recently announced. And this is very hot off the press. It was just formally announced a couple of days ago, earlier in the month of January. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Maybe it's new to others. But we're really excited about it. And we're going to share some helpful information about that. And then we will do a handoff. I'm going to share with Martin, and Martin will provide us with a customer viewpoint on using Oracle Apex and Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So very glad to have that perspective here as well. Now, if you're new to Oracle Apex, you haven't heard that before. You don't know what it is. This presentation is for you. Please stay with us. Hang on. By the end of this, you'll be pretty familiar with what low-code application development with Oracle Apex looks like and how it works. So definitely for new users, I think this will be very, very helpful and of interest. If you're an Oracle Apex guru already, I think this also will be of interest to you because we'll be getting into this new low-cost service that was recently announced. So I think we've got a little something for everyone. We're really excited to share this information with you. We've got a lot to cover and a fairly limited amount of time. So I'm going to move along pretty quickly. With that, let's jump right in. So in the last 6 months, we've been busy. We have just in the month of December, we upgraded our autonomous database-based services, which have Oracle Apex included in them. We have upgraded them to Apex version 20.2. This is a pretty major upgrade for Apex itself. It is packed with big innovations, a lot of interesting stuff in version 20.2, and we were eager to bring this to market. We did release it on-premises first, and then very shortly thereafter, we released it in our cloud, so it's there on our autonomous database offerings. And Apex 20.2 gives you, all kinds of automations, REST, data source synchronization, enhancements to faceted search, enhancements to printing, all kinds of goodness in Apex 22 that we think will add a lot of value for our Apex low-code application developers. So that's done now. It appeared in December. You may have noticed if you've been watching Oracle news that Oracle Corporation launched an autonomous JSON database service in late 2020, late calendar year 2020. So this is big news, and it enables you to manage JSON documents, JSON type data at scale in an autonomous database offering in the cloud. So I think this will be of great interest to folks who are interested in JSON. And I want to point out that Apex is included with this as well. So we have, and it's included at no extra cost. You get Apex with this autonomous JSON database offering that was recently launched. And then lastly, another thing that we did, and I guess this goes back to last summer, so I don't know, 6-7 months, but still fairly recent. We've been getting more and more inquiries about low-code app development using Oracle Apex. The interest seems to be accelerating quite a bit lately. And it became evident that we needed to make Oracle Apex a little more prominent in our cloud console. So we did that. You saw something appear in the cloud console a couple months back. Now, front and center, you see a little box that introduces you to Oracle Apex. And this is shown to every Oracle Cloud customer who's using OCI. Anyone who logs into OCI using the console will see Apex front and center now. We give you a little description, a little bit of information about it. We point you to a more detailed description and to an end-to-end tutorial. That's all linked to from the homepage now. And if you follow the tutorial within 10 to 15 minutes, you will know a fair amount about Oracle Apex and doing low-code app development on Apex. This tutorial and what's described on the homepage there, it does leverage the always free version of Oracle Autonomous Database. There is a small always free version of Oracle Autonomous Database available for an unlimited time. It has Apex included in it. So you can get started very quickly at zero cost to you. We will never charge you a cent for these small always free shapes. And it's a great place to get started with Apex. So that's a couple things that we have done in the last 6 months. Now I'm going to segue right into the big news. We have just recently launched a brand new Apex-oriented service running on OCI, running on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. The full name of it is Oracle Apex Application Development. So that's the official name of the SKU, if you will. That's a little bit of a mouthful to say over and over again. So we typically just call it Apex service for short. And with this service, you get a full stack. It's a full tech stack. Of course, you get a managed instance of Oracle Apex. That's the marquee feature with this. But you're also getting a lot from Oracle Cloud Infrastructure itself. You're getting a lot from the Oracle Autonomous Database that is included with the service, and from the managed middle tier that's also included with the service. And we're going to take a few minutes to drill a little bit on each one of these so you know what exactly is included. I'll start at the bottom of the stack with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This is Oracle's second generation infrastructure as a service and platform as a service cloud, built really from the ground up for enterprise requirements. Folks who care about having the highest performance, the best scalability characteristics, the strongest security, the lowest cost, all these things. We as a company, we had an opportunity to pause and think carefully about the requirements and build something really innovative from scratch to meet these needs. And that's our second generation cloud that we refer to as OCI. From the perspective of this new Apex service, what OCI gives us is the cloud control plane. And there's a lot of things with that. It gives us a very nice management console. This is where you can go in and create instances, terminate instances, start, stop instances, monitor and manage the instances. We have some nice metrics and reporting that show you what's going on in the Apex instance. So all that's exposed in a visual console, very nice, very powerful visual console. There are also public developer APIs and SDKs. So pretty much anything you can do in the console, you can also automate with scripts by talking to these APIs. You can automate the creation and termination of instances, the stopping and starting of instances, and so forth. So very nice developer interface that just comes with OCI. And then of course, OCI also provides some cloud fundamentals. It gives you the governance, the usage tracking, the actual customer billing, and so forth. That's all provided by OCI. And we think from an Apex standpoint that this is a very nice place for Apex low-code application development to land. It's a very nice substrate upon which we can deliver this to you. So really excited about OCI, and there's a lot of value just in the OCI foundation itself. The second big thing is Oracle Autonomous Database. This service also comes with an ADB for short. We'll call it ADB. And it is autonomous. There are other Oracle database offerings in the cloud besides this, but a lot of enthusiasm about our autonomous offerings lately. These are the ones that self-patch, upgrade, update. We take care of all that stuff for you. We patch it, we upgrade it and update it for you. There's a very slick backup and restore capability built into our autonomous database offerings. Also, because it's autonomous, it does its own troubleshooting and tuning of the database. It does that for you. And the objective here is to, from an Apex standpoint, by choosing autonomous database as our database platform, we want to liberate the low-code application developers from having to worry a lot about the database itself, having to do a lot of database management and database administration tasks. The objective is just take that off the table, so you can really focus on the apps themselves, building and deploying and updating your apps, and doing that in a low-code fashion. This database is elastic. As you see spikes in use, you can dynamically scale the resources that it has. You can add OCPU and storage to accommodate, changing usage patterns, add or remove OCPU and storage. So very elastic. It's fundamentally based on Oracle's, long-standing, very highly performant Oracle database under the covers. So very good performance characteristics. And of course, it's a converged database too. It's not a one-trick pony. It's a place where you can store and manage relational data, JSON data, spatial data, graph data, and much more. So this is not like other point solutions you see out there. It's a place where you can put all different types of data in one place, and then get the most out of that data by determining, correlations between your data, and then exposing that in applications in something like Apex. It really gives you the most life out of your data, the most use out of your data on this converged database platform. So we think autonomous database, again, it's a very good place for Apex low-code application development to land. And it's a great offering, and I think lots more coming from autonomous database in the future. Of course, you get a managed instance of Oracle Apex itself. And if you're not familiar with Apex, this is Oracle's low-code application development platform. It's for both citizen developers and professional developers. And it's not only for development, but also for deploying and running your apps. It is the platform on which you run your apps as well. And you can do all this using only a browser. No additional tools are required. So very nice low-code platform that does not require you to do a lot of coding or scripting in order to produce and maintain these apps. In the course of creating applications, you are working with prepackaged and incredibly powerful components that are just part of the Apex framework. And I've cited a couple of them here. There's a long list of components, but here's, interactive grid, faceted search, cards, charts, many more components that you can choose from as you are composing these applications. And you can literally drag and drop these components onto a palette, set some properties, and you have an application. You have an application ready to go. Of course, you need to populate them with data. These aren't just any applications. They're not like games or something. These are data-driven applications, and we're populating them with data. And you can pull data from diverse sources too. Many times the data is coming from the local database, and you're pulling data into your app via SQL statements, SQL queries. But this also supports REST data sources, REST endpoints. You can pull data from REST endpoints as well. So it's a nice platform to integrate data actually from diverse sources into overall applications, and then leverage that data from diverse sources in your application. So you're using the components, you're setting properties on them, and then you're pulling data into them via SQL or REST. The Apex engine itself runs in database, and your application logic is resolving in database. It is very close to where people are typically pulling their data from, physically close to the data that you're pulling in over SQL, for example. Because it's close to the data, it runs in database, it's able to fully leverage Oracle database for maximum performance and scalability. It's hard to get better performance characteristics in a low-code framework than you get with Apex. because it's close to the data and it's fully leveraging all that the database provides. It's also a fully managed instance of Oracle Apex. Again, we take care of the updating and patching. It's pre-configured, pre-packaged, and ready to go out of the gate for you. There are, of course, different levels of complexity with Apex applications. There's really simple apps. There's bigger apps. If you do have an app where you want to explicitly test it on an upcoming version of Apex before that update gets applied, you do have the option to defer upcoming updates by up to 40 days. So you can test your applications on the new thing before uptaking it. That is an option. But because Apex apps are based on these reusable components and very standard stuff like SQL and REST, usually you're taking updates over the years and you don't have to touch your apps at all. Most of the time you don't have to do anything. The apps just continue running. And Apex is a great way to preserve your investment in applications for years to come with very minimal additional effort required. I want to point out that this service offering does not include support for Oracle Net Services or SQL Net services. That means it does not support the ecosystem of Oracle and third-party database clients. So database tools and utilities, BI tools, programming language drivers for pretty much every language under the sun. That's the ecosystem of database clients. They're typically using SQL Net. This service specifically is focused on Apex apps, low-code Apex apps, building and deploying low-code Apex apps. So we have disabled SQL Net in this service. Now, if your application, and by the way, in exchange for disabling SQL Net, we're able to offer it at a vastly lower price point, which we'll talk about a little later. But if your application does evolve to the point where it needs to interact with Java, it needs a Java JDBC driver, for example, or it needs to interact with this ecosystem of database clients, it needs SQL Net. There is a very easy upgrade path to get to a full standard autonomous database with Apex included and SQL Net support. And it's literally a one click. You can upgrade your Apex service instance to a full standard autonomous database with Apex and SQL Net. So we provide a very slick upgrade path should you evolve to the point where you need that. Okay, lastly is the middle tier. So this includes a fully managed middle tier. Because Apex runs in database, that middle tier is very streamlined. It's pretty skinny. It's effectively your web relay that is brokering interactions from the end user in a browser with Apex running on the database on the back end. And it's handling the request responses and translating them and communicating with the database that is running Apex, but fairly streamlined, fairly skinny. The actual application logic resolves in the database in this case. This middle tier itself, we take care of the patching, the upgrading, we monitor it, we tune it. We don't want you to have to worry too much about the middle tier. We're taking care of that here. And we also take the opportunity to add a couple of helpful developer tools. These are delivered from out of the middle tier. And these are very helpful to folks who are building and deploying Apex applications. We give you Oracle REST data services, ORDS, with the ability to create custom REST endpoints on your Apex application data. So you can expose that application data in REST style with HTTP gets and puts and posts. We give you a REST interface to your Apex application data. We also give you a nice web-based IDE. This is a developer environment that enables you to quickly create SQL statements, refine your SQL statements, try out your SQL statements for pulling your data. You can create PL SQL scripts. And it also has a very nice graphical data modeling capability that allows you to graphically model the data that your applications are going to be working with. So all that's delivered from out of the middle tier and included with this new Apex service at no extra cost. Okay, so that's a quick look at the full stack and the various things that you get from this stack. We often get this question, okay, so how do I get started? And there's a couple of ways to get started. First, if you're a current OCI user, you have an OCI tenancy and an OCI account, then you're basically signing into that tenancy, navigating to Apex service. You'll see a new entry in the OCI service navigation menu for our new offering. You navigate there and then you click on the button to create an instance of Apex service. So pretty straightforward. Now, if you work in a corporate environment and it's someone else at your company who owns your OCI tenancy, then you're communicating with that person, asking them to do this, asking them to create an Apex service instance for you, and then simply send you the welcome email message that gets generated once the instance is done provisioning. That welcome email message is important. It has some important details in it. So if someone else in your company is doing this for you, make sure they send that to you at the end of the process. Now, if you want your very own tenancy, or you're just completely brand new to all of this, you're brand new to OCI, there is a way to get started for free using OCI free tier, and I put the link in the bottom left there, oracle.com/cloud/free. There's a fairly simple sign-up process for your own tenancy in OCI, and at the end of it, you will be in the OCI console in the homepage here, and that's where I'm going to pick up with our demo. But fairly simple to register for your very own free tenancy. You get an endowment of free cloud credits to start with, which you can then spend on services like Apex service. And you also get access to some always free services that don't burn cloud credits at all, and you can use for an unlimited time. So very nice capability as part of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. We have a very nice free tier and some things that can help you get up and running quickly. But at the end of the day, you are going to land in the OCI console homepage that I showed earlier. And in a minute or two, we're going to pick up with that and show you where to go from there. So that's getting started for brand new users. Okay, now for the demo. And we tried to put together a relatively end-to-end demo that shows you the complete picture. We're going to start by creating and managing an instance of this new Apex service. We'll complete some one-time Apex setup steps where you're setting up an initial Apex workspace and user account. This is something that you do with Apex running anywhere, whether it's running on an on-premises database or elsewhere in the cloud. It's just basic Apex stuff that you do once. And then once you've done that, it's very straightforward to create, modify, and run live applications. And we'll show you a quick example application. We'll build an application from scratch, run it, tweak it, and then rerun it. And we'll end on that point. So, okay, let's go right into some demo. So you're starting in the OCI console homepage, and if I click in the top left in the OCI service navigation menu, I see this new thing about Apex. If I click on this, Apex application development, Apex instances, I see this list screen. This is your jumping off point for all things Apex running in OCI, right? It gives you a kind of a Oracle Apex cocoon within OCI where you can see not only instances of this new Apex service, and we'll create one in a moment, but you can also see instances of Apex that are already running elsewhere. If you have Apex running on an autonomous data warehouse or Apex running on an autonomous transaction processing, as I do here, those are also listed. So you see Apex running on various derivatives of autonomous database. Now from here, I can save a few. If I want to jump right into Apex, I can do that. I can save a few clicks and I can jump right into Apex from here, or I can jump right into SQL Developer Web from here. And this is me clicking on an autonomous data warehouse that's running Apex. If I'm clicking on an instance of this new service running Apex, I'll see some additional options here. I can stop the instance, terminate the instance. I can do some additional things from here that will save me some clicks. But we give you a little convenience menu here right from the list that allows you to do common operations on your instances. Now, if I want to create a new instance of our new Apex, recently launched Apex service, I click on the blue button at the top, and I'll see a Create Instance dialog. This is a streamlined dialog. Normally, for other autonomous database type offerings, you have additional options. We were able to kind of remove some of that and streamline this quite a bit. So it's a little simpler dialogue now when you're creating an Apex service. I basically have to choose the OCI compartment where I want to run the instance. I enter a display name, I enter a database name. I choose a particular database version that I want running behind the scenes. And at present, we support only Oracle Database 19c. It's the long-term support release. Oracle has also this month, we recently launched our innovation release, Oracle Database 21c. We are hoping to add that as an option here in the near future. But for now, it's running on our long-term support 19c behind the scenes. And later, hopefully, we will give you the option to use the innovation release if you like. You choose your OCPU, your compute resources, your storage resources. It's a minimum of 1 OCPU and a minimum of 1 terabyte of storage. And auto scaling, that's pretty interesting. I believe that's checked by default. I usually just leave it checked for demo purposes. Very interesting capability. This enables you to, as you get spikes in usage of this, Oracle is watching the utilization. And if we see sustained high utilization, we can actually scale the OCPU for you. So you don't have to be manually watching that every second, watching out for spikes in use, and then manually scaling. We can do that all automatically. So we're looking at the utilization. We can add up to 3x the current OCPU count just on the fly to handle spikes in use. So that's a very nice capability as well. It's an option up to you whether you use it or not. Many of our customers do use that. Scrolling down the dialog, I do enter a password for the administrator of the database admin account, and I got to remember that password. We'll actually use that password in a later step here in a few minutes, but it's an important password, so remember it. You choose the network access type, and then you click the Create Apex Service button at the bottom, and you're off and running. Now, just a word on the network access. If I want to expose low-code Apex applications on the internet, as many of our users do, I would just go with this default here. I can restrict that public access on the internet using some access control rules. You can restrict by client IP address or CIDR blocks and IP addresses. You can restrict by OCI Virtual Cloud Networks, VCNs. There's a number of different ways you can restrict that secure public access. It's all over HTTPS as well, by the way. All encrypted using modern TLS type encryption. If this is Apex apps that are only used inside my company behind a firewall, it's really only internal apps. There is this virtual cloud network option on the right where I can actually put this instance physically inside of a virtual cloud network. And then only clients that are authorized in the VCN or clients that are added to the VCN will be able to access my Apex apps. So that's good for internal stuff that you don't want on the public internet. The left box is for stuff that you do want publicly available, and then you can overlay some access control rules on top of that. For demo purposes, I'm going to just go with that. Okay, so as soon as I click the Create Apex Service button, I'm taken to this new Apex instance details screen. And this is all about Apex. You see Apex specific information here in this new screen. I can see initially that I'm in a provisioning state. The provisioning process, we watch that very closely. It usually takes between 1 and 3 minutes. There are rare occasions where it's 5 minutes or maybe even 10 minutes, but that's quite rare. If it takes any more than 10 minutes, that would be exceptionally rare, and you should complain about, file an SR. You should complain about that. But it's almost always 1 to 3 minutes. You're waiting for it to be provisioned. And then this will change to green. You'll see that your Apex instance is available. It's running. And we actually will populate some additional information for you here. So when we say Apex specific details, notice it's showing the exact Apex version that you're running. It's showing the exact ORDS version that you're running. At the bottom, we have some Apex metrics. These are some helpful metrics about your instance. The number of page loads that have occurred lately, how many active Apex applications do you have running in this instance, and we're adding new metrics to this in the future. So lots of helpful stuff that we think will make this easy to monitor and manage. Now, also after the instance is finished provisioning and is live and running, I'll receive a welcome email. This confirms that the instance is available, and it gives me some helpful links so that I can link directly to Apex going forward. And this is a screenshot taken from a personal instance of mine, so I've rubbed out some details here, but you kind of get the idea. You'll get links directly to Apex here, which you can then bookmark. And at this point, you're not necessarily interacting with the OCI console anymore, right? You can just interact directly with Apex. You only need to go back to the OCI console if you're going to do something like stop or start the instance or restart the instance, terminate the instance. At this point, you can interact mainly with Apex and just use these links that you receive in the welcome email. Back on the details page, I want to point out as well, you see kind of in the middle of the screen, there's some text that says database : APEX1 underline, that's a link. If I drill into that, and watch the breadcrumb in the top left. If I drill into that, I leave the Apex world that's all about Apex instance and Apex details, and it takes me to a details page that's all about the underlying autonomous database. So this gives me more detail on the database itself. You know, for example, I can see database version 19C. I can confirm exactly what database version I'm running. Lots of helpful information about the autonomous database from here. I can launch into Apex from here if I want to. That's under the Tools tab that you see in the middle. But typically, you're going to be back in that Apex UI that we showed before. And if I want to go back to that, I can very easily flip back to that. You notice at the bottom here, it says Apex instance, instance name. If I click on that link, I'm back on the Apex instance details. So I can very easily flip between Apex specific helpful details and autonomous database specific helpful details that may be of interest. You can very easily go back and forth between them. So now is a good time to just pause and talk about that first time Apex setup steps. Whenever you have a new Apex instance, there are a couple things you need to do. And I'll show you that right now. If I click on Launch Apex in the top, I'm going to go into this one-time setup process. I could just as easily launch Apex from the link in the welcome email, or I could even launch Apex from that list screen that we showed before with the shortcuts. I'll just, for our demo purposes, we're going to launch from the Launch Apex button. And I'm taken directly into Apex Administration Services. Now here is where I'll enter that database admin password. That's the password you remember. It gets me into Apex Administration Services for the first time, and I'm immediately prompted to create an initial Apex workspace. So here I enter a name for the workspace, and I also am prompted to create an initial Apex user account and corresponding password. I'm going to just, for demo purposes, I just use, I'll just use demo and demo. And you click the button and you'll see a brief spinner. And then when that's done, you're dropped back into the home screen for Apex Administration Services. And Apex Administration Services is where you manage workspaces, you can manage user accounts and so forth. You can do a lot of stuff from admin services. But now that I have a workspace, I can actually jump in, start working with Apex, developing apps, trying apps out. And if you see the green bar at the top, we're acknowledging that you've created an initial workspace and an initial account. And if you click on that little link that says demo in yellow, that's another shortcut. This is going to take you directly to that workspace sign in. So now I've created a new workspace. I'm at my workspace. I'm going to sign into it using my demo account. And here I'm in the Apex application build services. And this is where you typically, as a low-code application developer, this is where you typically are going to spend most of your time. There's four main pieces to it. There's the actual app builder, which we'll show. There's the SQL workshop, where you can work directly with tables and other objects in the database, and you can execute SQL statements, PL SQL scripts from the SQL workshop. There's team development. This has some very nice collaborative development features for teams of Apex developers. And then there's the app gallery, where we have some packaged Apex apps that are just part of Apex. They give you a nice starting point, and they actually do useful things. There's a bug tracking app and a project management P-Track project manager app, and a bunch of helpful apps that you can fool around with to get started. And many people build their apps on top of those, just by starting with those and adapting those. Other folks use those for their stated purpose, to actually do bug tracking and so forth. But some nice apps included in the app gallery. For our demo purposes, I'm going to build an app from scratch. I'll click on App Builder, and we're going to start creating an Apex app. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. I'm going to follow a wizard here. I'll click on Create New App, and this is a wizard-driven guide that will help me create a new app. There's a couple of different options in the wizard. I'm going to do this from a file. So this is where I'm actually going to upload some sample data. And then Apex is going to inspect that and intelligently build a basic application on top of that data for me. So some very cool stuff here. We'll show you this in a second, but it's actually looking at the data and kind of proposing a basic app on top of that data for me. And I can upload data of various types. It can be CSV, Microsoft Excel, XML, JSON, or you can just physically copy and paste some sample data into this wizard to get started. I'm going to click on From a File. I'll click on Copy and Paste in this case. And notice when I click on copy and paste, we actually have some sample data sets included with Apex that you can choose from. to actually give you some sample data sets to fool around with. For this purpose, I'm going to pick project and task sample data set, and then that will automatically copy and paste the sample data for me. So this gives me a nice starting point. Very simple, very easy. I click next, and so this is where some magic happens. We're actually inspecting, parsing the data, looking at the data types, proposing a table that would store this data, proposing column data types for the table. We're doing a bunch of stuff just based on this raw data and showing you kind of how to store it and manage it in the database. All you really need to do is enter a table name. I've entered project_tasks, but a lot of intelligence on the back end happening here to kind of propose how to store and manage that data. Then if I click load data, I've now loaded it. You can see it was a small data set, 73 rows, but enough to give me a start. The next step, I'm going to click on create application. And now there's a lot of additional intelligence that happens where we're looking at the table data, and this is where we're actually proposing some application pages on top of that. You can see it will have 5 pages. I can click on edit and tweak individual pages if I want. I'm going to just go with the 5 pages that it's proposing. Under features, I check all, and this will throw the whole kitchen sink in there in terms of Apex capability. So it gives you a good view of everything that Apex can do. So now, all I did was load up some sample data, which by itself was prepackaged with Apex. It inspected the data, it's created a table structure, and proposed an app on top of that. I simply click create application to finish. You'll see a little progress bar, and then once that's done, it drops me into the app. And you can see these are all the artifacts that will be created that have been created for the application. Typically, the first thing users will do is run it. You've got a fully functional app here. Let's see it. Let's see what it looks like. At the top right, if I click on that run button, I actually am now in the application. This is the application as end users would see it. And like most apps, it starts by prompting me for a login. For our demo purposes, I'm going to just use the demo account that we previously created. For a real production app, of course, you would create distinct end user accounts and probably distinct developer accounts if you've got distinct developers working on this app. You would give everyone minimum required privileges, separation of duties, and all the good security stuff that Apex is capable of. That's typically what you do for a production app. For our purposes, I'm going to just recycle the demo account I already created. We'll use that for the time being. But in real life, of course, you should create separate accounts. So I'm going to sign in with demo. And here I see my live application. Apex completely generated this for me. All I did was point it to some sample data, and I see a fully functional live app. If I poke around and experiment with this a little, I'll start by clicking on dashboard. And I see it's looked at the data and it's proposed some bar charts and some pie charts that help me analyze and understand my data. This was all done and created and added into the app automatically. If I click on project task search, it gives me a list screen of my key data and a faceted search bar on the left. This is much like the faceted search that you see in web shopping applications, e-commerce applications. It analyzed the data and proposed facets and created facets that I can now click on to narrow and refine that list that is displayed to the right. So some very cool functionality there. It gives you the faceted search essentially for free. If I click on project task report, this is a full report of all my data. I can page through it. I can create new records by clicking on the create button on the right. I can edit an existing record. If I just click on the edit icon, it will show me a form that was generated. This also was all automatically generated for me, so I can add or edit records very easily. So very nice report capability. Now, if I go back to the project task search, let's put on our end user hat for a moment. Let's assume that people are really using this project tasks app to do real project management stuff. Typically, reporting on project status would be something that we anticipate our end users would do frequently. And I noticed that Apex put that status facet a little further down the list. If it's a frequent operation, we want to elevate it. We want it further up, higher up in the list. We want it to be more obvious, more visible. So that's a really simple change that we can demonstrate very quickly. I want that status to render higher up on the page. Because I launched this app from out of Apex App Builder, I have this little developer bar at the bottom. And I can very easily, as a developer, click to edit this particular page, and it takes me into Apex Page Designer. Now, if you're an Apex low-code application developer, this is a place where you spend a lot of time. This is where you're designing, building, and iterating on your pages and refining your pages. On the left-hand side, we have something called the rendering tree. This renders the elements of your page. It shows them in a hierarchical format. In the middle, we see a graphical page layout that shows you roughly, where things reside on the page. At the bottom is a gallery of components. So these are the actual components that you can drag and drop into your layout as you're building out your app, and lots of very powerful components to choose from. And then on the right-hand side of Page Designer is this property editor. This is where I'm setting properties on the components to determine exactly the type of interactivity and the type of behavior I want from that component. So this is where you're typically spending a fair amount of time as an Apex low-code app developer is here in the Page Designer. And for my really simple change, you notice there's something called P3_status on the left-hand side in the rendering tree. I'm gonna just click on that, drag it up a little higher in the rendering tree so it's underneath project, drop it. And then if on the top right, if I click the run button, this is going to finalize that change, redeploy, rerun, and I've got that change immediately now in a live application. And here we can see the application with my status a little higher and in a little more obvious place for our end users. So that's a really simple example, really quick example of tweaking, editing an existing app, making your change, deploying your change, and rerunning your app and seeing it in real time. So I'm going to end my demonstration on that note. We've covered a lot of territory. It shows creating an Apex service instance, managing an Apex service instance, doing the one-time Apex setup steps, and actually working with a really quick Apex app. Notice that once I've completed that one-time Apex setup, the rest is very easy to get going with. It just took me a few minutes to create an Apex app and tweak my Apex app. So once you've completed the one-time setup, you're off and running, and it's very easy to get going from there. Okay, so I'm going to stop demo, and at this point I want to hand it over to Martin. And Martin is going to talk to us a little bit about the customer perspective and give us his viewpoint on using Apex in OCI, both with the Always Free Autonomous Database and with this recently launched Apex service. So with that, Martin, we'll take it away.
Hi, Todd. Thanks. That's a great demo and great use case for those. I saw some questions in the Q&A about low code analysis and stuff. So hopefully people got a general understanding of the power of Apex and how easy it is to get started. So today I'm going to talk about the Apex service from a business case of actually analyzing it for an organization to see if it's good. And I think the steps that I went through to review it and see if it's a right fit will probably be applicable to a lot of people watching this, and just even reading some of the questions, the Q&A, which we'll answer after. I hope this is really relevant. So to give a quick background on this case study is I've been doing some work for a small service company. They are not a technology company at all, which is fine. And they are moving from a paper. When I say paper, I'm not even talking about soft copies of Excel, but physical pieces of paper to digital. So it's a huge cultural change. On that note, they have no IT department. There is no one in the organization that manages. There's no line item in the budget for IT departments. So we have to make sure that whatever we do is as easy and simple from a cost perspective and in the long run to manage and sustain. And where Apex comes in is we're developing this application in Apex, and that's important for them because we can develop so quickly and we can actually change their business with Apex quickly rather than them waiting around for months to develop. They want to see results rather than lines of code, essentially. Now, for some of you on this call, you're probably wondering, well, I don't work for a small service company and we have an IT department. The reality is sometimes those IT departments can get very clogged down with work, and it's tough for people to get work done. And a classic case is, for instance, an accounting department or an HR department has a process they need to automate or improve on. And what they'll usually do is go up to their internal IT department, and it's not uncommon for IT to come back and saying, hey, you got to wait about a year to 6 months before we even analyze this, and then we'll get back to you. And that's not really an acceptable answer. So what they tend to do is then go and find maybe a consulting company or an individual consultant to go and develop something for them. And this is very similar to the case I'm experiencing now, just different customer, but the concept's the same, that these HR departments or accounting departments also don't have an IT budget. They're supposed to use their own IT department. So there's some politics involved with that. And they don't want to inherit servers or like manage licensing and all those things. And so they want this one-stop shop, or they should have this one-stop shop that's really easy. Next slide. So the reason where I started on this is we started with using the free ATP that Todd talked about. And I know we're here for the Apex service, and there's a reason why I'm bringing up the always free ATP. And it's really good from a development perspective because it gives the full power of everything. You've got 19 or 21C, depending on your region availability. There's SQL Net Access, which is for all the development tools, which a standard developer would want. And the nice thing too is, from a license perspective, you can actually run this in production. So there's this edge case in really small shops where you might want to take your development and saying, let's go live and see what happens. I'm not recommending it. However, from a end user perspective, that could be really good, really quick to get running. So it's not like you have to look at this and saying, I've got to do all this transformations in the long run. You can just run applications. So you might have a citizen developer in your accounting or HR department that creates something and you just roll with it. This is a great place to start. And as Apex is always included, you get a lot, you're usually a few weeks behind the latest releases, but there's no management. So it's great for a development platform. Next slide. Now, from the advantages from the business that they see is when you get started, sometimes you can get bogged down for a week, even just acquiring resources, acquiring licenses, setting up proper management and all these infrastructure costs. And even if you buy physical assets of a server, it could take you a week to get up and running. With the always free ATP, you can get up and running in minutes. And the nice thing in my situation is I was actually able to show results within a few days of rapid prototyping. I'd build something, show it to them. And the key thing is, instead of wasting 3 days of server setup, I actually spent that time using it to solve business problems. And we actually were able to take that and within a week had a very concrete application, at least from the bare bones structure perspective. The other key advantage, and don't underplay this at all, is the one-click clone from database from a backup. What this means is let's say you're about to do something or restructure data that you know is going to be a huge move. You can actually, even using the free ATP, click on the database and saying, clone the entire thing, and you clone it to a side area. You can play around with that database and then throw it away when you're done. This is very, very powerful, and don't underestimate this. I've been in a situation before where we've had some performance issues and we couldn't play with the development environment because it was actively being used for something else. We were about to do some major restructuring of how the database was organized and how some of the indexes. And I said, okay, in order to do this, I can't do it in production. I can't do it in development. I need this third place. And the answer I got back was, well, the DBAs need to go look for disk space, and then they're available only in 4 weeks. And so that means that we couldn't solve the problem for 4 weeks because I couldn't clone and I needed something for about 2 to 3 days. This is where using the Oracle Cloud, and especially the free ATP, you can get this up and running. You get this right away. And I didn't need to bring in a DBA. Next slide. So with that, what are some of the limits? You have a 20 gigabyte total database. For most people to start off, that's good enough. You can't manually back up, usually not an issue because they have daily backups. You're limited to two two free ATPs. So you can't go and run your entire organization in the sense of launching tons of databases on there. Again, these are all reasonable. And one OCPU, which, and Todd added this comment in, was you may have to share with others. So sometimes if you have a noisy neighbor, i.e. they're doing a lot of processing, your OCPU might degrade a bit. And that's only on the free ATP. One small note I want to say is for those that are looking at this, the 20 gig total, if you're going to store files or clobs or blobs, you can actually use the object storage in the Oracle Cloud to store some of that data and not really affect the 20 gigabyte total. And the cost of that is much cheaper because you do get some object storage for free, but even the cost of paying for it is negligible. Next slide, please. So let's go to November when I started this project. And our current plan was we were going to run a development and test environment at $0, right? With I put some stars for some small object storage. Again, it's minor, it's a rounding error. And then the plan was that when we were ready to go to production, we were going to go and use the full ATP instance or autonomous and pay roughly $13,000. Not the end of the world, good price, but that was the current plan. Next slide. And then come January, we were ready to go live. So I just did one more check to see what was available. And lo and behold, the Apex service was there. And it's exactly what we needed from a cost perspective. This organization doesn't really have a huge amount of data, right? Most small, like HR or accounting, might not need a full huge instance. And so they didn't need to pay, they don't want to pay $13,000. Whereas the Apex service comes in and it's only $4,000, give or take. And that's a huge cost savings, especially when you scale it over 5 years, 10 years time, which a lot of these applications can live. And the other nice thing is if you look at this from a pure savings perspective, it's about a 70% savings. Now, the 70% savings, you do lose one or two features, and Todd's talked about it, and I'll talk about it a bit more. Now, the key thing too is from a risk perspective, let's just say we went with the Apex service and we find that we do need full ATP. Is there going to be a huge cost, time, and effort wise to shift it over? And the answer is no. It's a very simple process. And Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing anything, but you can migrate very easily from the free Apex, or sorry, not the free Apex service, but from the lower cost option of the Apex service over to a full ATP. And so that if you're concerned about, like, does Apex service meet all my requirements? Maybe it does today, but in 3 years it might not. And in that time, just migrate over and you're done. Next slide. So what are the technical differences between the two? And I will prefix a slide saying, this is my personal analysis. This is not from Oracle. So please be aware when making purchasing decisions. Todd can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. And the major thing is the SQL Net Access. You don't get it on Apex service. So for developers, that means no SQL dev, and there's no like SQL Plus or SQL CL connection. It's not the end of the world. The big key things though to look at is auto scaling. It's there. Space, 1 terabyte, huge. Most environments won't even get close to that. And it has automated and manual backups. The one thing that really stood out to me for this was the no cloning from backup right now. And I'll touch base on that pretty soon. So again, if you're looking at using Apex service for your environment, I would recommend looking at this sheet. Now, things may change as time goes on, but it's good high-level overview. Next slide. So what is, from a developer perspective, what are the SQL Net Access workarounds? So one of the things, again, is develop using the free service, which is why I talk so much about it, because it has all of that. So why not leverage it? In production, let's say you're using Apex service, use SQL Developer Web. It's SQL Developer on the web, or you can think of it almost like SQL Developer Lite, but for what you probably need to do in a production environment, i.e. run a data migration script, quickly run 1 or 2 queries to check on things, it's great. Another thing is to actually leverage Apex itself. So if you know you're going to, as let's say a developer or system administrator, need to look at certain things. One thing I look at a lot is Logger for log output. Create those reports in Apex so that you can quickly review them. And Apex has all these great tools of interactive reports where you can just write select star from my table, and then you can do all the filtering and everything at an end user perspective rather than having to type out hundreds of lines of code. So really leverage what Apex provides. And then from a release perspective, I do all my development on file based. I don't store things in the database, or I don't work actively in the database editing packages. I do it on a file system. And so merging up or taking each file and manually releasing each one or compiling each package in Vue takes a lot of time. There is some open source scripts that we've created or I've worked on, and some others have as well, that can take all those files and merge it into one, and then you can just run it straight from SQL Developer Web. Now I won't give you a demo, but there is a link in the slides that show you where it is, and there's a short demo and description on that site. It's on a GitHub site. Next slide. So the final decision, what did we do? And I know this is a whole promo for Apex service, but in the end, we ended up staying with the free tier for now. And so we decided to shift of doing Apex development in one of the free tiers and production in the other. And the reason why is we want to actually move to the Apex service soon. However, there were a couple of key things that we, from a risk perspective, that we decided against. And the first is the ability to clone from a backup. Again, we know that we're going to experience times where we need to test something or simulate a change from live production to make sure it's going to work, especially because we don't have SQL Net backup. And because we can't clone from it today, Todd will talk about this in a moment, we need that ability. The other thing is restoring from manual backups. We couldn't do that. And then custom domains. This wasn't as critical. It's more of a nice to have. So it's not that we're not going to go with the Apex service. It's as soon as probably the first two points are resolved, and I think they will be, given that you get that in the full autonomous database, then we'll move over, and that will be a huge shift from both a power perspective, and then from development, we know that we can do everything we need to support the organization, and at the same time, they don't have to inherit a lot of technical debt with all these migration scripts or cloning scripts. It's literally go into the Oracle Cloud online, and there's one button that says clone database, and you're done. It's that simple. And so with that, Todd, I'll turn it over to you, and then we can probably take there's a lot of great questions coming in on the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Martin. And while you were talking, I was answering, I think I answered a couple of the Q&A questions over chat. A lot of great questions coming in. I see Jurgen, you have some great questions. Vinicius, Lino, a lot of these things I think we'll address in the roadmap. I'm going to end on the roadmap and kind of give you a view of what's coming. So I think we'll address many of these. I do want to save some time at the very end for Q&A. That's all about questions. I think we're more or less on track. I don't know. Diana, is it okay if we go 5 or 10 minutes over?
Yes,
I think that's okay.
fine.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I want to make sure we get this out on the table so you have a clear understanding of the packaging and pricing for our new service. This is one of the first things Oracle gets asked when we launch a new service. How much does it cost? Exactly what is the packaging? So we're going to get this right out on the table up front. Much like our other autonomous database offerings, this package has two components. There's the OCPU and there's the terabyte. And the OCPU, you can have one or more. For each OCPU, we do bill hourly, actually, but if you add up the hours for running continuously during a 31-day month, that piece comes out to about US $240 per month, for each of the OCPUs. And for the terabyte storage, it comes out to about $120 US per month. You add those together, that means our starting price for this service for one OCPU and 1 terabyte of storage, it's about US $360 per month. And that's for the full stack that we talked about, a fully managed and autonomous mission critical stack that includes Oracle support, supported by Oracle, It has a service level objective and suitable for running production stuff. You get all that at a starting price of about $360 US per month. We also get questions around, they're already coming in. Okay, about how much usage does that support, right? So about how much can I support with each of those OCPUs? And we've done some internal performance and scalability testing on this topic. Each OCPU, you can get hundreds of thousands of page views per hour out of each OCPU. So they scale really well. And remember, this is Apex. It runs in database. It fully leverages the performance and scalability of the database itself. And the autonomous database that you're getting here is running on Oracle Exadata engineered systems behind the scenes. These aren't just generic blades with generic CPUs. You're getting top of the line Xeon Platinums. You get 2 execution threads per OCPU. So you can do a ton with each of these OCPUs. You can literally support, our testing shows you can support hundreds of users hammering an app all simultaneously with just one OCPU. Now, of course, your mileage of it may vary, right? It depends on the size of the data and the complexity of the app and the user think times and all kinds of things. But typically, you're gonna get just with one OCPU something that's suitable for common Apex applications. And if you need to scale the service without ever leaving the service, it scales up and down very nicely. It does it dynamically. You can get up to 128 OCPUs if you need to. You can support dozens or up to millions of users as you need to. We tried to price all this so that it's very approachable to low-code application developers of all kinds. Whether you're a low-code developer working at a corporation and you have an expense account, or you're just working independently and you don't have an expense account, or you're just volunteering your time and your skills on a volunteer project, a not-for-profit kind of endeavor. We wanted to price this so it's approachable to all kinds of low-code developers. And at that US $360 per month, we think we've done that. Now, I want to point out as well that unlike other low-code offerings that you see out there from other cloud vendors, we do not charge you extra on a per application basis. We do not charge you extra on a per developer basis. We do not charge you extra on a per end user basis. There's no extra fees for any of that. You can get quite a lot in terms of end users and apps and developers using this at a very reasonable entry-level price point. And just for the frosting on top, we've also included the data transfer. You often see in other cloud vendors, you get nickel and dimed for the data going into and out of the service, the ingress, the egress. That's all included at no extra cost with this service as well. So we think a very compelling bundle at a very compelling price. And of course, you can get started with it completely free in OCI free tier. You get that allotment or endowment of free credits when you sign up, and you can spend those on Apex service. Those actually burn down at an even more discounted rate when you're in that trial period. So you can use quite a lot of Apex service with those free credits in the free tier. And of course, as Martin mentioned, there is also the always free autonomous database. It's a small free shape of autonomous database with Apex included that has no time boundary associated. It's just there as long as you want to use it. We do, for the always free offerings, we do reclaim those if they're not used for months and months at a time. This is common practice in this industry. So they're free for an unlimited time so long as you're using it, but there is an element of use it or lose it there too. You got to keep using it. If you leave it fallow for months or quarters at a time, we will reclaim it. With Apex service, you don't need to worry about that. With the paid Apex service, you don't really need to do that. That's something that's unique to the always free offerings. So that's the details. That's the scoop on the pricing and packaging. We've tried to put together a bundle that is very useful and compelling to a broad swath of the low code and Apex developers. Whether you're a citizen developer or a professional developer, we want something that's gonna be attractive to you. And then lastly, roadmap. We'll end on this, and then we'll go back to the Q&A. And some of these are the exact things that Martin pointed out, as we started talking. There are things that we're already working on already on our roadmap. Oracle prohibits me from giving you exact dates. I'm not able to do that, but I can tell you we are actively working on all of these things. In fact, I tried to kind of put them in a timeline order when I think that they will appear. But I cannot give you exact dates and details of that nature. I can just say these are all things we're working on, and we are intending to deliver as part of this service. We want to provide additional metrics. We think those are very, very useful for monitoring and managing what's going on in Apex, what's going on in your instance. We are certainly intending to support that full instance cloning capability. And I can tell you we have work going on in that regard right now. In fact, was on a call about that earlier this morning. So that is something we are intending to support. And we also have started the wheels in motion on a small, always free version of Apex service. So it'll probably have similar limitations to the always free autonomous database. One shared and somewhat oversubscribed OCPU, limited probably to 20 gigs of storage. But we want to have an always free version of this Apex service specifically. So if you don't need SQLNet, you don't think you'll need SQLNet, you can just always stay within this Apex service offering and go from free to paid at will. And you don't have to branch out to autonomous database unless you have a need to, and you actually need that SQLNet support. So that's in the works. We had a question about this that I answered on the chat too, asking about, okay, I've got a large volume of data. How do I get it into an instance of this Apex service? And we have a way to do that right now. You can put, for example, a data pump dump file in OCI object storage, then import directly an Apex service from there, very high speed connection, OCI to OCI. It does involve some PL SQL scripting. So you're running some PL SQL script in the included SQL Developer Web or in the Apex SQL Workshop. It does involve some scripting, and it's using packages like DBMS Cloud and DBMS Data Pump to get the job done. We don't have a published procedure for this yet, but I am working on a blog post all about this, so stay tuned. Ultimately, we'd like to put all that behind a very nice, very slick GUI-based import capability, so it's more of a button click rather than copying, pasting, and executing some PL SQL script. It's driven from the GUI. So that is something that is on our roadmap as well. And Martin mentioned custom domain names. For a lot of Apex apps that are used internally within corporations, having it run on our canned oraclecloudapps.com domain, for a lot of internal stuff that you're running in your company, that's fine. Like you may or may not necessarily care about seeing your company's domain name in the address bar at all times. If it runs on Oracle Cloud Apps, that's often just fine. However, there are many scenarios where you're building and wanting to expose an Apex app on the public internet, and you want to do some self-promotion, right? You want your domain name visible in the browser address bar at all times, right? Not just a URL redirect up front, but your domain name at all times. We have a name for that internally. We refer to it as vanity URLs, and that is definitely something we want to support as well. We want to give you the ability to use your own custom domain name for your Apex apps and your REST endpoints. And that's something that's very much in our view and on our roadmap as well. And then lastly, this new Apex service is for commercial use, and it's available in the OCI commercial data centers, the OCI commercial data regions is what they're called. And there are government customers who just use the commercial version, but there are also government customers who have to have it running in a government FedRAMP compliant data center, and it has to be billed in a special way for government customers. It has to be billed monthly and billed in arrears and so forth. And we are working on a version of this Apex service that would be suitable for that use case, and that can run specifically in the government and national security compliant data centers. So stay tuned for that as well. That's something we're hoping to deliver in the coming 12 months. So this is kind of like a year or so kind of time frame. These are the things that we're working on and hoping to bring to you next. All right, I'm going to end on that point. I'll just leave this slide showing